All right. Here comes the tea and cookies. Wonderful. Yeah.
The tea's steeping just a little bit longer.
When it's ready, it will be served. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning again, everybody. I pushed a few buttons because I recorded the piece, and then when I finished talking, I stopped recording, and we had a conversation among ourselves. So today I'm going to start by talking about the demise of a gentleman by the name of Fethullah Gulen. He is a Turkish Muslim scholar and teacher who passed away a couple of weeks ago. So I'll talk about him, a little bit about his background to explain sort of why I'm bringing him up, and then bring that forward to why I think that's useful for us in our practice here, why his teaching and his person is important and useful to us. Thank you. Thank you. He is somebody whose teachings I've become very, very familiar with. He is the teacher. He's normally referred to as Hoca Efendi. Hoca Efendi is Turkish and translates roughly as master teacher, revered teacher, something like that. It comes from, the words come from the Arabic, but many Turkish words do. And he was the teacher, he was a teacher whose teachings ended up founding this fantastic movement, which is called the Hizmet movement. Hizmet, again, it comes from an Arabic word, it means service. It's a culture of service, and it's a movement of service. His teacher was a person by the name of Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, who was a scholar in Turkey around about the time of Ataturk. So this was the time when pretty much overnight the Ottoman script was wiped out, and the Turkish written script became the English script, the European script, Roman script. And so all the scholars became illiterate overnight. Which is funny when you say it, but can you imagine living through that? So Said Nursi's teachings profoundly influenced Gulen's teachings. And during that revolution, during these incredibly difficult times, Nursi's teachings were all about compassion and peace and love. There was no move to insurrection, to revolution. It was all love. Gulen's teachings, he crystallized it into three basic components. The first was, if people don't have resources, people are poor, they're pretty much on it. They can't figure out where to go, what to do. So, thank you, Susan. So the first thing we have to do is make sure people have resources. They have food, they have shelter. So he and his followers put a lot of effort into precisely that. And then if people, most of the problems in the world come from ignorance. And the way we get rid of ignorance is education. So the movement built schools. And they started off building schools in Turkey, and there were obviously thousands of people got involved with this, and they became very devoted followers of Gulen. And they built 1,000 schools, it's over 1,000 schools in Turkey, K through 12, university, lots of schools, so over 1,000 private schools, lots of scholarships to bring all sorts of people into them. And there were secular schools, obviously he was Muslim, but there were secular schools, very intentionally secular, science-oriented schools. And then they started sending people around the world. So they built schools in South Africa and India and Croatia and Nepal and Tanzania and the US. These are all places that I've seen and many, many others. Over 1,000 schools around the world. And then in 2016, there was a coup. Seems highly improbable to me. It was really a coup. It was a stage thing. Because what was happening, there was the president of Turkey, Erdogan, being investigated for corruption as much of his cabinet was, and he denied it all. Many of his cabinet resigned and said, "Yep, guilty." He said, "No, not guilty. None of you are guilty. This is all put up by the US, and Gulen is their frontman." So there was this thing called a coup, which was like 20 people showed up on a bridge with 2 tanks and blocked the bridge. I mean, not really, but it was an excuse to lock all these people up. So all the intelligentsia, all the police, the teachers, they were all locked up. These were graduates of these schools. So the movement and the people who I knew, I was in India traveling with the folks at the time when this coup happened. And so the people I know and the whole community was just, I mean, it was disasterful. Something like 70,000, so a whole bunch of prisoners were set free, and something like 70,000 members of the movement. I mean, basically policemen, teachers, business people, whatever, people who've been involved with this movement were just incarcerated. Families were tortured. People living outside Turkey lost touch with their families. They were afraid to contact their families because they knew that all communication would be monitored. And there was a very real risk that by contacting anybody, that person would then be locked up or tortured and basically held out there saying, "If you come home, we'll set him free." It's really toxic. So it's just a terrible, terrible environment. The reason I go through all of that, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, hopefully, you've probably already got a glimpse of it, but it's how we respond to difficult times. But the specific thing here is the people who were involved in the movement, devastated, very difficult times. They just kept going. They kept trying to build schools. They kept engaging in these dialogue activities. That's the third branch I talked about, poverty, education. The third branch is dialogue. Find an environment to talk to people who have different views than you. Talk to anybody. If we don't talk to each other, we're never going to bring down the walls. So dialogue. And these international trips are an important part of that dialogue, and one of the ones I was on the Windbreak. So they kept on with this work, just simply kept going. Gulen, he didn't get involved in politics, by which I mean he didn't pick sides. He didn't support individuals and say that this party is good, and he didn't run for office, and he didn't support anything. What Gulen did is he stood on principle. He stood on the principle of compassion, stood on these principles of education and dialogue, stood on the principle of democracy. So democracy, hands down, is the form of government we need. He did not get involved in politics in a way that would become divisive and would separate. He was always stepping forward to try and find ways to have conversations, bring things together. So this was absolutely not passive. Very, very, very engaged and very, very active, but just in a very, very peaceful way. We never condone violence. So if you can't tell by the way I'm talking about this, when I attended a remembrance service from last Friday, Friday 2 nights ago, and it was deeply, deeply moving. I was profoundly moved, and it's just remembering everything he stood for, remembering everything he did, and being with all of these people who are still, I know probably hundreds of similar gatherings around the world for people who are involved. All of these people just continuing to do this work, continuing to be really engaged, really active in this very peaceful way. I'm reminded of the Lotus Sutra. Bodhisattva, not disparaging, or never disparaging. If you remember that story, this is the Lotus Sutra is a wonderful but very strange script, text rather. Bodhisattva, never disparaging. It really encapsulates the whole of the Lotus Sutra. It's like this kaleidoscopic self-referential document, but this one chapter really encapsulates the whole spirit of the Lotus Sutra. Bodhisattva, never disparaging, walks around the world and he sees a group of people and he says, "You're going to be a Buddha, you're going to be a Buddha, you're going to be a Buddha. I will never disparage you, you're going to be a Buddha." And people would say, "It's just nonsense. They get upset at him, and sometimes people would throw stones at him, and he'd run to the other side of the room. And he'd say, "You're going to be a Buddha, and you're going to be a Buddha." It's beautiful. And that's what this is about. It's about not seeing clearly, because when we see clearly, it is true. It is absolutely, unquestionably true. Everybody has this nature. Just the way the world is. And so to see that and not to see the good or the bad, not to judge, not to pick sides, and just to see that simple, beautiful truth. You're a Buddha, you're going to be a Buddha. And from that place, always, always doing the right thing. Just because it's the right thing. Helping everybody. Not just helping people we like. Not just helping people whose beliefs line up with us. Helping people who need help. Just because they need help. Loving everybody. It's not condoning bad actions. Hate the sin, not the sinner, right? I mean, it's not condoning bad actions at all. It's standing up against bad actions and talking about why they're bad actions, but nonetheless loving everybody. I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time with the people around Fatula Gul, and I've actually met him before. And it's beautiful being in that company, and it is just inspiring. It rubs off. All living beings are the heirs of the owners of their action, heirs of their action, dependent on their action, and live related to their actions. Whatever they do, for good or for evil, to that will they fall heir. So that's something that's chanted in Theravadan monasteries, not around the world, but in English-speaking ones, right? So they chant the Pali and then they chant the English. That's about equanimity. All living beings are the heirs of their action, the owners of their actions. It's about equanimity, about recognizing that everybody owns their own karma. Everybody is responsible for the consequences of their actions. That's what your karma is. It's you act, and then you inherit those consequences. No way around it. We say, what do we say? My actions are my only true belongings. Yeah. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So this is true for everybody. That chant I gave was equanimity, which is looking out at others, and it's equally true for us. But when we look out at others, that takes us to this place of equanimity where we don't get caught up in other people's stories. What we do is we feel sympathy and compassion for other people. And we see, you're going to be a Buddha, and you're going to be a Buddha. And you may be doing unskillful things right now. And my heart breaks because you're doing unskillful things, because the harm it's doing to you and to others doesn't change the fundamental point. Mm. And then we bring that home, on the piece I just read. My karma, I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. All I have is what I do right now. And I can live a life where I'm not present and I'm not paying attention. And I'm just reactive, and something comes up, it causes that sort of elevation, that like tightening of the chest, and I react in a very negative kind of way, out of ego, out of spite, out of anger, basically out of ignorance. I can choose to live a life in a manner that that's what happens, then I will inherit all of that, and it won't be a happy life. Or let's say, it could be a much happier than it would be. Let's just put it that way. And it could be a much more useful. Or I can choose to cultivate mindfulness, to cultivate being present, to cultivate seeing the pervasiveness of Buddha nature, seeing that the negative, as Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen said, I have double vision. I see only my own faults. I do not see the faults of others. So to cultivate this mindfulness so we are present and we don't see faults in others, we see causes and conditions. We see people living in the consequences of the way they were raised up and the relationships they've been in and the situation, their culture, and their society. And we feel compassion for them. And when seeing compassion in that, we are then in a place to act right now from a place of compassion, from a place of an open heart, not from a place of judgment, not from a place of negativism, but from an open heart. And it gives us the opportunity to live into being the person we want to be. So take that away and think about that. Who do you want to be? What person do you want to be? And when you cut somebody off in traffic, when you get irritated and snap at a loved one, is that who you really want to be? You can justify it, you can explain and say, that person, they were driving recklessly and it was, the right thing to do was to not let them in because it would have been bad training for them to be let in, or, my loved one that really, there's a boundary there and we need to keep boundaries and, it's just, you can justify all of these things. Of course we can. Of course we can. But who do you really want to be? And I know for me, whenever I move away, whenever I catch myself moving away or looking back, having moved away from a place of acting out of compassion, in other words, where I slip off acting out of compassion, where I slip off acting out of love, that's not who I want to be. And yes, it may have been practical, it may have driven appropriate outcomes, but it's not who I want to be. And it doesn't fundamentally leave me in a place of peace and happiness. And when I remember and I come back and I act out of compassion, I see the need, as we go back to Gulin, I see the need for helping people move out of poverty. I see the need for education, so much education. And I see the need for dialogue, to create safe spaces for people to come together and talk and get to know other people not like them. Whenever I remember that, and I anchor my life on that, and I act from that place, I'm at peace. I'm happy. So I remember Hojo Effendi, Mr. Gulin, with great fondness. And his legacy is the legacy of the thousands of people, probably tens of thousands of people, maybe it'd be hundreds of thousands of people because of the graduates of all of these schools who are still carrying on this work. And 100 or so books he wrote that are available to us. And the obvious parallels of that teaching with this teaching are the opportunity to carry on this way of life. So the legacy is remembering that way of life and living that way of life. And I bring that up today, not just because of the passing of Fatullah Gulen a couple of weeks ago, but because we are living in a difficult time right now. Many people are completely overwhelmed by what we will find out on Tuesday evening or soon thereafter. And it's people across all political beliefs. It's not, one group of people is feeling ostracized, and everybody. Just such a difficult situation. We're seeing extreme weather. We've got a lot of that in the southern states, and then if you pick up the newspapers, you see they've got a lot of it in Spain recently. And the Gulf Stream may be flipping in my home country, my original home country. If that happens, could be very, very cold. So we're living in very, very difficult times, and it's very easy to slip off this place. You okay, Pam?
Yeah, sorry, I swallowed wrong.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm slipping back there or something.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for us to slip off this place of compassion and love with all the pressures that are going on around us. But I would encourage us all to, when we feel that happening, slow down, take a couple of breaths, try and come down, try and ground ourselves. And remember that to react from that place is not going to result in a good outcome, and it's not going to result in happiness. And if we can slow things down, ground ourselves, and remember compassion, the world will be a much more beautiful place. We'll be much more successful in it, and we'll be much more happy. So with that, I'm going to push